I Good afternoon. I'm Stuart Nachbar with Educated Quest. I'm with my friend BJ Kennedy. BJ is owner of Premier Training in Pennington, New Jersey. She has been an expert in technology-based training, working with young adults and working adults for 25 years. And BJ and I have had several conversations about our work because we hear that parents and prospective college students are very much afraid about online coursework, having to learn their a college curriculum, maybe even the end of their high school curriculum too, on a computer. And there's a lot of fears and there's a lot of concerns. And obviously parents looking at colleges are thinking, well, it's not the same thing as going to the big lecture class or being in the small group, intimate seminar setting. But I never took all of my classes online as an 18-year-old. And I wanted to talk with someone who knows a little bit more about designing courses and teaching and how teachers work with students in this setting. So BJ, thank you for spending this afternoon with me.
You're very welcome, Stuart. Thank you for the invitation.
So BJ, based on your experience, how might lectures and class discussions look different between online and actually being there?
There's a couple ways that they change the dialogue among students. There's a big drive to go back to more of a chat board or a discussion board format, and that works well in some forums. It may also be more appropriate nowadays to schedule what's known as synchronous learning, where in fact you bring together a group of students into small dialogue spaces, much like a Zoom room or a Google Meet space, and you target the conversations, keeping them very short, using very specific keywords and prompts. So for a designer, it takes a little bit more thought and creativity to script out instructions for the instructor and or facilitators to ensure the conversation stays in a certain space. Another way to engage students in a discussion space is to, there's an application that I've used in some spaces where you bring up an article and you allow people to comment live in the article on those certain points. It's another way of communicating and another way of commenting on it, but it gives people a little bit more flexibility to select information and then comment on it. A little bit more, I want to say, contemporary.
If you were in an admissions office and parents were asking you about these things, what would you kind of tell them besides maybe relax?
One of the things that maybe some parents are feeling in anticipation about, or some are a little anxious about, is the use of technology and having it be not inclusive, having students not feel like they're belonging, they're participating. Being in an online learning forum makes it a little bit difficult to sit in the back of the room and say nothing and still pass. It does require a little bit more engagement, but there are many ways you can get around that by using smaller groups, smaller sessions, and even just different types of activities to engage people a little bit more.
So for these kinds of activities, let's say you have to give homework. What sort of assignments would be different than, let's say, writing something, turning it in? How would exams be different besides like filling in circles or writing in well, we used blue books. They use different tools today.
Composition books, yeah.
Composition books, they're a little different color. They're not all blue. But how would people complete these things? How would people design? How would the instructor design them to be, one, hold the student's attention to get them to do the work right, and two, to do it?
One of the things you see happening in a lot of K through 12 online learning, and in that space, I've been so deeply impressed by what I've seen. It takes a lot of work to prep the assignment, because what you need to do is ensure the student has all the materials, all the equipment, all the stuff to use. And then the student can actually do the assignment, whatever it may be. For example, I think most times about science experiments, you make certain that the student has an adult in the area, and the two of them conduct the experiment according to the notes. And then the student can either capture by recording on their phone or simply talking into a Zoom place and recording it and sharing that MP3 video or MP4 video and allowing the teachers to grade them on their presentation. I feel like we switch from an all written space to a chemistry, pardon the pun, of writing, demonstration, recording, presentation, and all of it becomes a package deal that you submit in. It's not just a paper. Some may still be just papers. There's a definite value to writing and making certain you know how to write and how to write well. So in that space, your exams may be, again, in much the same format. I've written courses where the exam involves recording a presentation and providing that presentation as part of or with the actual written paper.
So a faculty member, let's say it's a big lecture class. Now, would a camera need to look at the blackboard, the professor? If it's a demonstration, let's say it's chemistry, would they have to show what which chemicals were being mixed, get a sense of what they look like? And
again, what becomes more complex is accounting for all the things the instructor must do to deliver the instruction. And I think that's one of the, it's another question that you have kind of had me think about. But when you're preparing to teach in an online space, it's definitely not just the video camera in the big lecture hall, because you can't necessarily see the instructor and all the information that he or she is presenting. Sometimes a blackboard might still be helpful, but maybe not. The instructor may find that at certain points, they turn off their video camera and bring up an actual whiteboard on the screen to do a little bit more interactive talking and demonstrating. And I've seen those happen on YouTube's as well. You can probably search a lot of educated videos and find that same sort of dialogue where the instructor's face goes out, you still hear them, but then either they're writing on a screen or they're showing some animated film.
now I know people who are K-12 teachers, and one thing I've noticed is most of them have fairly neat handwriting. Now, when it comes to college professors who didn't have to take handwriting to get an education certification, is there problems? Do they have to adjust, say, maybe I have to write this a little better so people can see it better, people get this quickly so that I don't have to take a question more than I usually
That's an
do in the
interesting
classroom?
observation. I don't know. My professors in college were mixed. I had some with good handwriting and some maybe not so much. But where it becomes critical is if you are doing something where you really are handwriting. The technology today is such that you can type and literally make the screen look like you're writing. So there are other options available to some of those instructors. There is also a learning curve for some instructors on how to do just that. How do I communicate when I used to just write in chalk on the board? And now suddenly I've got to provide more explanation because people can't see me. And I think that's I want to say it's the big issue that many instructors and parents take for granted. Simply removing the classroom struck the whole engagement space where you can look at somebody and see their facial expressions and know in a moment whether they're engaged or not, whether they're lost, confused, simply by facial expressions. You also take for granted that people can see your hands. They watch you do something. Well, all of that's removed when you go into an online space. And instructors, as well as the people who are designing their courses, need a whole new way to prepare a training session. The education has a bigger investment in how do I communicate versus, well, I'll just say this. Well, you can't just say this in an online space.
If can a good course designer help a less than dynamic lecturer become more dynamic?
If they are willing to change.
And has it been your experience that most people who are not used to teaching, other than in a classroom, that they're at least willing to listen, to take instruction?
I think it's a mixed bag. I've come across both sides. I had one gentleman that I worked with who was teaching, I want to say it was like a policy and safety or policing and safety course. He was teaching it for a group of people who work in security at a university so that they can be more prepared for crises and emergencies in first aid and response and security and safety. And he was very apprehensive about going into this online space, didn't feel good about it at all. And one of the things I started planting in his brain is, depending on how you ask the question and what you ask people to look at, you're very likely going to get them to give you a little bit more of a better answer than you would just asking a question off the cuff. Really giving thought to the questions and how you're going to do it. Another key piece here is understanding the amount of reading that is going to happen in an online forum is 3 times more, maybe 4, than any normal in-class space. And that is something that many parents, as well as students and instructors, need to be mindful of. Hence the reason that the greater variety you can provide to the student to not just read as part of the assignment. Watch this video. After you watch the video, think about these 3 points. Pick one and provide me your opinion. And again, you choose your words far more carefully because they must be read. And to try and remove ambiguities, you really want to think about every single word. And that as well adds a lot of time to the designing space.
You're going to an interesting point. As I listen to you, I'm wondering, does the homework almost become more important than the lecture? In other words,
Yes.
you might see faculty say, you know what, you can listen to the lecture, here's the lecture, listen to it at any time you want. Now, these are the assignments you must complete by this day. And because I don't have to be in class, I can record this and you can listen to it. I'll schedule office hours, but you have to do the homework. And that teacher might assign more homework.
Lectures become a bit outdated, mainly because most humans don't do well in lectures these days. Perhaps you haven't noticed, there's a whole new generation of humans, and it's not just kids. There's a bunch of adults who experience the same kind of challenges. You just can't sit and listen for something that long anymore. So that whole format is even something they're discouraging more of. They're not encouraging people to sit and just talk at people. Talking at people has become a most old-fashioned way of delivering training. There is a greater need for dialogue, and there's a shift to try and help many instructors do two things differently. One, not talk as much. As strange as that sounds, you don't necessarily want to talk as much. What you want to do is encourage conversation. You want to encourage the people in the class to talk amongst each other, as well as inject and direct the conversation. And those are some skills that are still being refined by many instructors. And that's in K through 12 as well as college and beyond.
One of the things from going from high school where teachers pretty much could communicate in English, adequately, and some even better than adequately, to college is often the teacher's native language at a U.S. university is not English. And let's say I'm listening to Professor Kennedy's lecture, and Professor Kennedy has a thick accent.
Yeah.
And I can't understand, she has this thick Welsh accent, and I can't understand what she's saying. Am I able to ask the professor after the lecture, what did you mean by this? What did you mean by that?
Aye. There is definitely more need to be forgiving of not necessarily understanding a dialect. And it's okay. It's okay for a student, and the instructor should expect that. Those individuals, and I've noticed it even when I go into a space where someone listens to me talk and they say that my accent is strange, or it doesn't sound like I'm from New Jersey. Well, if we expand that to being, well, it sounds like you're from the Ukraine, but I can't quite place the accent. And it's difficult. Could you speak a little slower? Or could you repeat that? Those sort of questions are things that students and instructors need to just be mindful of. For some individuals, I feel they are very blessed when they come from a household where there's a mixed language, where they're learning their native tongue, they're learning Spanish, they're learning Puerto Rican, they're speaking Russian at home, they're even speaking in Haitian at home. And yet, when they go outside, they talk to their friends in English. Having that multilingual household is so much better, because it allows the students to acknowledge that there's going to be a communication challenge. Just admit to the fact that there is going to be one. We have an incredibly diverse community in the United States, and it continues to grow and morph as more and more instructors and educators come here for the opportunity to teach at one of our universities.
When you consider what a college student has to take to earn a degree, they have to take English courses, mathematics, some computer course of some kind, social studies, science. Are there any particular subjects that are more difficult to teach online than others?
There most certainly are. For people that go into more hands-on spaces. So for example, if you were going into being a medical assistant, or a physical therapist. There's some things that you can do and learn in the online space, but then there's going to be engagements that you have to perfect how you do something or where you place your fingers to increase the mobility in the joint or relieve the pressure from an inflammation. Those particular topics and items are usually more challenging to do in an online space. However, they're not impossible. We have, over the past several months, bore witness to virtual doctoring, virtual working. Again, it's usually a video conference, but imagine that video conference education thing taking place for an entire class. The instructors, the students, both parties are going to need to be in a different sort of headspace going into this. There's going to need to be more patience and a willingness to spend more time. And I think that's another question that you and I had spoken briefly about. If every instructor is now going to be required to spend more time to support their students, and however they need to do it, whether it's one-on-one sessions, whether it's small group sessions, it's not the instructor walking around a classroom and sitting at a different table. It's hours of time that is not only invested in delivering the training, but in reviewing it.
I'm trying to imagine as you're talking, teaching someone dances.
It can be done. It can be done. It just requires a little more creativity.
I guess you'd have to have the computer's camera record the student trying to practice the steps.
It becomes a two-for activity. The student must have some sort of video recording capability, and it would be very much like this interview, except the dance instructor would be assessing the performance as it's taking place and commenting.
And I guess the instructor would tell the student to be responsible for the music that they pick and to follow, because there's certain music.
Maybe not. I believe that there can still be some assigned things, where to do a comparison of apples to apples across a given classroom, each student would have to do and perform the same moves to the same music, especially if at some point they're expected to perform together.
For parents visiting colleges or talking virtually, most likely they're not going to be going to campus in the fall, how could they be sure if the quality of the education that they're going to receive, and some schools are more expensive than others, is going to be at least the same as if the classes were on campus?
That's a great question. I had given that quite a bit of thought. One opportunity would be to offer the students and parents the opportunity to participate in a handful of sessions, maybe 2 or 3, not the whole course, but to audit, if you will, a session from course that they're currently their student is going to be enrolled in. So let's say I'm going to be enrolled in an accounting class, and I want to know if my student if my child is going to have the same kind of experience. Well, you could show the teacher or show the parent a section of that course, a lesson. What does the lesson plan look like? What kind of activities are they doing? Are they just reading? Are they reading and performing some test? Are they doing group work? Ideally, you'd want to prepare, the university would want to prepare samples of those particular courses. Maybe it's the core freshman courses that they create a sampling of, to understand that while all courses are not equal, because they're not, in a given course, this is what the student will experience. They're going to be doing group work. They're still going to need to communicate with one another. They're going to need to do teamwork. They're going to need to prepare a presentation. They're going to need to build something together. And they just need to be shown how their students are going to be expected to perform. I think if the universities and colleges are showing the parents that, that's probably as close as you can get to saying, well, what's it going to be like because they're not on campus? There's so much more to school life than, in fact, the campus lifestyle. I understand for years it's been a huge part of the dynamic and the engagement. But there are thousands of students in K through 12 right now that are doing distance learning and that still have friends and that still go out and play ball in the afternoon. They just can't go to campus.
Now, one thing mothers and fathers are likely to ask, more so than the kids, unless the kids are working adults, how come I must pay the same tuition if as if the classes took place on campus?
I started to address that a little bit, but I wanted to save most of it for this question.
Okay.
Changing how you teach. When you're in an online forum, let's imagine it is mostly a discussion board and papers. Every week, there's a discussion. You have 30 people in a given course. 30 people times 3 to 5 posts a week. So that's 30, 5 posts, that's 150 posts. And that's just 1 week. So in addition to reading any assignments the instructor has to do, the instructor has to read 150 posts every week, in addition to grading papers, in addition to putting up content, in addition to making certain you've got all the materials sent out to the students, making certain they're communicating and addressing challenges. And that's just one course. Most instructors, especially at the university level, don't just teach one course a semester. You're not just teaching one class of 30. You have 5. Different levels, different topics. And the amount of time it takes for a designer to convert the course from being taught in person to now taking away those automatic gestures, those facial gestures, it takes approximately 3 times longer to build the course. There's more to read. There's more to test. There's more to ensure it says all the right things. So there's still the same, if not more work. And you still have all those same standard obligations that every professor has. So I appreciate the frustration that some parents are losing out on the funding amount. You know, like, I paid to have my student on campus. How much of that tuition is room and board? How much of the tuition is not? Focus on the amount that is not the room and board, and think about 150 posts in 1 week for one class. There's far more obligation and onus on the instructor to do 3 times the amount of work. And I think that's something that would be helpful in the conversation with the parents so that they understand that. And hopefully universities convey that.
Do you think even, let's say there's a cure for the virus, fast forward, everybody can be vaccinated before school starts, and if they're all vaccinated, no one will transmit the virus to anybody else. But the online component of higher education, maybe even, junior, senior year of high school education, do you think that'll change forever?
I think it has. I think it has in many ways, because it enables people to obtain the same education. And you don't have to physically be there. It's a huge mental shift. You see many corporations today selling off buildings, selling big, costly pieces of real estate because their staff can work at home. Why am I paying for a cost when my staff can work at home and complete the same work? You don't pay your employees less. You're just selling off the real estate. Food for thought. Changing the way you think about it.
It might change college shopping down the road too.
I think it will. I'm hopeful that it does, because there's so much new technology at play that to discount the power of the next generation to change how we learn altogether would just be sad. It would be sad to not give the benefit of the doubt to the next generation for redefining how we learn.
BJ, thank you very much for this time. I really appreciate it. And I've learned a lot from this conversation, as I usually do when we talk.
Thank you so much, Stuart. It's been great. And hopefully some of the parents and students will benefit from what I've had to share.
Thank you very again.
You're welcome.